For this task, you're working on lesson 1B about complex sentences. You should have two handouts that have 1B on them. One of them is a chart, and then the other one starts with question 7 and has some sentences on it for you to practice. So we're going to do a little review note-taking and talk a little bit more about a dependent clause. You've already taken notes on this in your notebook, but as you know, I like to do a lot of repetition, explaining and hearing these terms and definitions again and again so that you're familiar with them. So, what is a phrase? A phrase is a group of words without both a subject and a verb. We've talked about prepositional phrases, infinitives, we've talked about positives, but phrases themselves are not sentences because they do not have a subject and a verb. A clause is a group of words with both a subject and a verb, and up to this point we've really only talked about independent clauses, so we've always used that term that it's a complete sentence, but from now on, just because you see a subject and a verb doesn't necessarily mean it's a complete sentence. If it's an independent clause, it is a complete sentence because it expresses a complete thought. We've talked about combining sentences with these conjunctions called coordinating conjunctions or fanboys. And a coordinating conjunction is a word that joins two other words or phrases or clauses or sentences together. We label them CC. We use them in this formula, subject and verb, comma, coordinating conjunction, so it's got to be one of these fanboys, plus another subject and a verb, or to level up our writing, we could use this thing called a semicolon, and a semicolon takes the place of both the comma in the conjunction. Now we're going to add this new term here, a dependent clause. And a dependent clause looks like a sentence because it has a subject and a verb, but it has this thing called a subordinating conjunction. And a subordinating conjunction, when you put it at the beginning of the sentence, is going to change it so that it is not a complete sentence anymore. It's going to be a fragment. Because a subordinating conjunction's job is that it's a word that introduces a dependent clause. So this whole thing together is a dependent clause. It's got a subordinating conjunction with a subject and a verb following it, and we're going to do some practice at identifying those. When we have a sentence that has a dependent clause in it, we have a complex sentence. And there are three different ways they can be written. We could have the independent clause first and the dependent clause second. That means that we'll see our subordinating conjunction in the middle. Or we could have our dependent clause first, which means we'll see the subordinating conjunction at the beginning. Just like a prepositional phrase or an infinitive that's used as a transition, we have to put a comma there. So a dependent clause, if it's at the beginning of a sentence, can be used as a transition. And then sometimes we have it kind of split in the middle of the independent clause. So you'll see a subject with a dependent clause describing that subject usually, and then the verb at the end. So it's kind of split up in the middle. Now I know this probably sounds very confusing. Right now we're just reviewing terminology, but we're going to get into the practice. So you're going to need a highlighter and a writing utensil for the next task, and we're going to model how we go through and code or recognize the type of sentence. For the next screencast, we're going to go through and model how we label sentences to recognize if they're complex. Okay?